Welcome to Show Studio, to our beautiful new space in Victoria. It's London Fashion Week, second panel of the day. We've been really going at it today. And we're going to be talking about the Burberry show. I say we're going to be talking about the Burberry show, but I imagine we're going to end up talking a lot about the Burberry system and their announcement of how they're going to be sort of remodeling their business, remodeling their show, and the huge domino effect that this has had across fashion. It's not just Burberry who've announced a kind of see now, buy now strategy, but I feel like they were really the catalyst for this complete glut of conversations, agitation about the future of fashion, the crashing system, and what have you. But before we dive into our dissection of their Spring Summer 17 show and all of the topics that come with that, I'll let my amazing set of panellists, who are all looking so glamorous, introduce themselves, starting with you, Amy.
My name's Amy de la Haye. I'm a dress historian and curator, and I work at London College of Fashion.
My name's Katie Barron. I'm a journalist and an author, and I'm also the head of retail at Trends Business Stylus.
I'm Rosanna Falconer, and I'm business director at Matthew Williamson.
Hi everyone. So, as I was saying, I'm going to talk about the business first, and then I'm thinking of you as our Burberry correspondent because I know you've done so much research into this show, which is amazing. But I do want to start just by talking a little bit about the announcement they made, which is now coming into sort of place for this show, that everything will be available straight from the runway, really remodeling what was quite a kind of standard practice in fashion where things were shown and then sold 6 months after. And it was this kind of unsaid thing in fashion because it didn't work, and I think everyone could see that. But this really has started a huge amount of agitation. And I say agitation, not conversation, because I think it's got people quite angry. And a lot of people are debating, what effect is this going to have on young designers? What does this strategy mean? There's a lot of talk that this is going to damage creativity or it's going to damage making and skill. I'm just interested to get everyone's perspective. Rosanna is our business director in situ. Tell me, what's your thought on all of it? And do you think that this kind of mass debate is Justified.
Absolutely. I think that what Burberry are doing is they are really positioning themselves as the brand who have the production, they have the teams, they have the budget to be able to pull off see now, buy now at its very best. They can therefore be a pinnacle for others to look to, and there is no doubt they have spent the last 5 years really nourishing their customer base and finding out about their customer base. The fact that they are so digital first means that they have access to stats about their customers.
And incredible data they must have.
That so many brands that were purely offline would never have. And obviously not forgetting their social media, which has always been at the fore for them. So for them, they have the data and the production to make this move, and it makes complete sense to say customer first for them. I think the thing about see now, buy now is it is putting the customer first, which this is business, that's important. But
do you think it is putting the customer first? Because a lot of people have been like, we're just, we need to challenge people, we need to presume that they want to wait, and we're just giving in, we're making like the high street.
You don't want to, the thing about you don't want to, you still need, as a creative, one still needs to push the customer and give them things that they didn't ever want, that knew that they wanted. They didn't ever know that they wanted. I think the half of the debate is around the fact that people are dismissing this as fast fashion, and it's absolutely not that. And I think that's why Burberry have been so clever making sure this is at the maker's house and putting the emphasis on the craftsmanship, because that's putting the focus back on it being a designer luxury brand.
Because the schedule's not actually changed. There seems to be this misconception that because it's see now, buy now, that the clothes are made like overnight, which is they're still made with this.
They've just pushed their whole production schedule back so they can accommodate it, and they'll even have their sort of press and trade viewings several months earlier. So actually they're doing this quite interesting thing where they'll be, in a way actually, that I think is kind of cultivating that insider eliteness again, where they're showing people things and apparently actually sending images out watermarked with the name of the person that's looking at it. So if anything's leaked, they know exactly who's leaked it, which is quite clever. So there is that aspect of it. But I think, the thing that's so smart about Burberry, and I'm not a massive Burberry fan, I'm from a business perspective, I'm very interested in Burberry. The thing that they've done that's very smart is, ultimately they are a luxury brand, but they're also a kind of luxury masstige brand. And the way that they can do this is because they have this big network of stores as well to pump these things out into. So you can put these things out there, then you can populate your stores with them. And as you said, they cultivate this digital following of people that actually I think they can always use that to leverage the want for these things, because of course what if you show all these things, then actually people decide they don't really want them. Then you've got that's one of the places you have a real problem with see now buy now. But if they're really being very savvy with their marketing things, they can kind of keep this the sort of pressure on and instigate that incitement to buy by just kind of creating a frenzy around them. And of course they do that with their celebrity that they use and those sorts of things.
Data is so slippery. Like, say an image of a dress goes on Instagram and it gets 2,000 likes, whereas an image of a different dress gets 1,000 likes. Does that necessarily mean that dress would sell better? That's the hard thing.
When I said data, what I meant was, and I think it applies to, because we are see now, buy now, but we do that, we don't show, so it's purely in the fact that we release a campaign and it's shoppable instantly. We don't have the 6-month delay anymore, which has worked well for our customer base. But I think that the whole concept of data and the way it can work, you shouldn't really be listening to your social media data, which, like you say, it's slippery. Your followers on social media, are they really the followers are they really the people who convert? It's the e-commerce data. And if that can be analysed properly and drilled down into properly, then also the kind of traffic of the website, and it's the people actually going with a vested interest in shopping.
Because they have the whole data thing where actually you can even go, if you have a Burberry profile, you can even change your own data settings, so you can kind of update the things you like. So the idea is they're creating this kind of omni-channel universe where whether you're dealing with them online or probably even like via a tele-concierge or you're going to their store, the idea is they'll keep knowing about your preferences.
It's terrifying.
But it is a bit terrifying.
Look at a scarf and then be bombarded with it for the rest of your life.
Well, that is a big problem, because that is a big problem with big data, that actually people get into this filter bubble where actually people are just seeing the things you've been recommending.
It really happens. If you look at something on an e-commerce site and then you're on the news or something and it's following you across the internet.
Hence why I think, you were very, Rosanna was saying is very true about, you have to, when we're talking about the creativity, for me, it's interesting to see what they do creatively, because creatively, actually, Burberry are one of the brands where I don't really think hold up super well creatively, which is why I would say, when I hear the interviews afterwards, I'm always a little bit disappointed. It's very commercial, that's what they do. But you have to keep innovating commercially, because otherwise, it's great having these systems, and I feel like there's almost a sense for me that they're compensating with having this amazing digital universe for the creativity of the business.
I think that's something they're going to have. Shows are always so much more about the digital innovation than they are about the clothes.
Yeah, they're going to have to really watch that, I think, especially in places with, they've had such a big market in Asia, etc., that actually that's a market that, as it's maturing, customers over there are looking for brands that are more under the radar and things that are a bit more slippery and probably a bit more conceptual. You're starting to see the equivalent of Tenko Sakomo or those sorts of things starting to filter in there. So actually they're not going to have that market quite as much. So I think there's a bit of a danger there.
That's interesting.
But I do think it's interesting, the whole showing a September
design
show.
by committee, basically. If you're designing collections that respond to just what customers want in a way that is putting the customer first, and I do think that's brilliant, because I think for a long time the customer was so forgotten, and especially at Fashion Week, you just sat there and were like, who is buying this? Who is this for? Who is this mystery woman? But then I think Burberry is perhaps different, as you said, because there's not the same sort of creative thrust. But then you think for other brands who have always been the ones, the best designers. I was talking to Guram Gvasalia about this, who's like the CEO of Vetements, and he was saying, he wrote his thesis on Margiela, which is fascinating. And he was saying about this kind of awful thing that some brands have, and he used Margiela as an example, who make things too soon, where it makes sense to them, doesn't make sense to anyone else for like 3 seasons, but actually in 3 season times everyone else copies it, and maybe it's bad because they then get the acclaim for it in the sales. But you need people like that in fashion, where their ideas almost aren't successful, but then are. It's the classic Miuccia Prada thing. Of like,
I mean, to be fair to Burberry, they're not asking people to interact with things. Topshop will say, would you like this in blue or white? You can, play around with those kinds of things. They're not actually doing that, so they're not actually responding. They're not doing it totally by design, by committee. It's just that the clothes are actually deliberately supposed to be, I think that Burberry is kind of beautiful but inoffensive in a lot of ways. So therefore it's designed to appeal to a lot of people. And, I wouldn't go so far as to say it's bland, but it's certainly not something that's avant-garde, we're going to be pushing boundaries, let's face it. But they aren't, but to be fair, they aren't going as far as, allowing people to fiddle with it. So it's still the vision of the designer, whether we like it or not.
I love the exhibition. It's not really, I suppose fiddle isn't the right word about the exhibition, but after the show for the next few days, you can go and visit Maker's House, and I think that's wonderful. Yeah. And that really is making sure that the customer, not only in a store they'd be able to feel the textures and look at the embroidery up close, obviously try it on, but this is getting to see the crafts behind it in the atelier. But
what do you think of that, Amy, as a kind of, as a curator, this obsession that brands have with staging exhibitions that are basically marketing campaigns? Is it good that people are more embracing of the fashion exhibition as a medium, or do you worry that it's... I can tell you were working it out.
I suppose what interested me was when you were talking about the press releases and saying about the technology and social media. What interested me was that you were saying about, does the design marry up with technology? For me, what I suppose was really interesting is what the reference is. Yeah. So I read the references for the press release, and then I'm really interested to see that actually do those references bear. Could you read them into the designs, or what's the relationship between them two?
They feel a bit retrofitted sometimes, don't they?
Yeah, or are the words one thing and they're beautifully poetic? And I love buying into the idea that the collection's inspired by Orlando, and but will it be evidenced? Will there be?
Sometimes
is it a bit noblemen walking down the
and you do feel a bit like someone's gone, okay, we're a British brand, we really need to export ourselves as British. What should we do? And then someone goes, Virginia Woolf. Let's go with that.
Also, what I thought was really interesting as well was that you're saying they're a British brand, but I just was really interested that they actually keep marketing themselves as English. So they're saying we're a global brand and we're doing all this stuff, but actually they're very, very specific in promoting their Englishness.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I was going to ask about that actually, which is something that is so strange, because there are lots of brands. Paul Smith is a similar one. Brands that really kind of use not just heritage, but this sense of a cultural identity. And in some ways, that seems so old-fashioned. And
it's very nice, sort of 1980s.
Yeah, but does it resonate with I guess it must do. It's strange in these times.
It's what Vivienne Westwood always did, isn't it? And looking back. But I suppose, I don't know.
But I guess with Vivienne Westwood, it was more about fashion history. It was less about a kind of...
I think it does, though. I think there's still a fascination with the kind of perceived subversiveness of English culture and our kind of weird idiosyncrasies and our foibles and our kind of, the nature of kind of being one thing, that idea of being one thing on the surface and being darker underneath. So whether it's a sort of Westwood or McQueen or even, Simone Rocha now, thinking of someone, there's still that vibe, isn't there, of things being kind of at odds, that people are totally fascinated. I always remember for my first book, when I interviewed Tabitha Simmons, and she was talking about when she started working at American Vogue, and Anna Wintour was saying she specifically hired her because she needed that injection of what she felt was a sense of Britishness or Englishness, actually, that nobody else could bring.
It's the British woman, it's the English rose. That has, for a lot of customers, that is very exportable.
It is,
and that's very appealing.
But all those
that
mills
way of dressing.
Most of the mills are in Scotland, aren't they? So, and it's not very inclusive. And if we're talking about global and international markets, and then we describe ourselves just in terms of Englishness,
a bit myopic.
Yes.
Yeah.
It could be argued.
And what's your take on this changing fashion schedule? Do you have concerns about just how interesting dress is going to be moving forward if it's built in these kind of very consumer-focused ways?
I think I don't have the expertise to know about the business side of it. I can see that people want things instantly, and we live in a society where there's the instant gratification. And maybe I've kind of romantic, but I think I've got all those Edith Wharton novels in my head, and they talk about, these big trunks coming from Paris, and you unpacked them, and in America how they wouldn't wear the clothes for one season because they were too new, and maybe there's something very special about what you wait for. But I'm not a business person.
I agree. I think that there'll be something where actually we'll for some brands it'll be a case of kind of see it now, buy it now, but you don't necessarily have it now. Waiting isn't always a bad thing, and that kind of anticipation is something that never totally dies. And to desire, a lot of the part of that is the anticipation. There are some quite interesting studies on to do with shopping, saying that actually the minute you get something, you want something else. So actually, if you can
That's
delay
a collector's
it,
mentality as well, isn't it? You collect and you want the next thing. I'm just thinking though, you're saying that, but we're saying about like the instant gratification and wanting it, and yet we're consistently being pushed back to the past, so it's a kind of tension that doesn't make sense. So we're saying about artisans and craftsmen, and we're going back in this case to sort of the 16th century. And then it's about instant gratification, and it's an interesting tension.
The term instant gratification is, I think we just have to be really careful about using it, because that has a lot, not that we all use it, I use it too, but it's there's a really negative undertone to that, and I think that's where that's why people have been struggling. And I think as a shopper and a customer, I'd hate that idea of that I just wanted instant gratification. But actually, if I'm, say, a comparable amount to a really special Burberry finale look, £3,000, so not that I could really spend that amount, but say...
Are you going to be buying straight from the runway?
I'm clicking as soon as I get home. In fact, it's on my phone as soon as this panel finishes. Now, if I wanted to spend a comparable amount, say with a car, piece of art, jewellery, I would really have it immediately. And that's where I think a lot of consumers, particularly, we found it was really the kind of... our US market struggled yet less. Our US market is very used to the fashion model and the way it works, and interestingly, because we've stopped using seasonal terminology, we now refer to collections by their motif or by their origin, where they're inspired. The US customer base is still requesting, is this autumn winter 16, is this pre-fall? They are trying, I think they want the context, they also want to know it's the newest, but really the kind of Euro jet setter, which is a lot of our customer base, they really just think of it as they see something, they love it, and they want it immediately for their very important gala the following week.
Do you think that just comes from consuming in general? It's interesting that you mentioned like buying a car or buying art, which I think buying art's quite interesting, because often there is a delay, if you buy when it's part of an exhibition or something like that, but I think it also comes from like how we consume everything. If we want food, we can get it on an app. If we want, even how people date, we're so used to getting things really fast. It's like it's so convenient. Like I'm writing a piece at the moment about subscription shopping, and it's fascinating how that model, which used to be like groceries or, toiletries, that you'd get them delivered every month, there are actually quite a lot of upcoming brands who are working like that, where you get your clothes delivered each month, you always don't have to choose. And I wonder if just people's mindset has changed. They don't expect to have to make, and I think it probably does come from the internet, they don't expect to have to make effort to consume. And that,
I thought fashion was we were supposed to be really thinking in the other way, where we buy a garment that we might spend a lot of money on, but we really cherish it, and that increasingly designers they were putting the name of the person who perhaps sewed it, or they were trying to make it so much more personal, so there's more of an interface, and that you think, I am buying something and it is valuable. It's valuable in terms of human labour, resources, what I've spent on it.
I was speaking to Deborah Milner, the couturier, I think it was on a panel, and she was even saying that, and I've heard this actually from other couture ateliers for big, beautiful brands, that they even struggle to get women who are buying couture to come to the number of fittings that are required to buy a couture dress. A lot of them are like, I don't have time.
But that's why it died out.
But do you think that it just really shows that I think a certain, I don't know if it is a generation of consumers, or if it's different cultures, or if it's, I don't know what it is, don't prioritise invested time as something that makes something seem exciting.
I think we're going to see a backlash against this, actually. I think particularly with what we call sort of Gen Z people, that are kind of young, really young teens now, where actually there's going to be a certain cachet in having to work for things, even being like having to be a member of a collective to be able to buy things. Because this kind of, the trouble is with being able to access everything means that everything feels so ubiquitous that nothing really has that much value. So although we're in this period of excitement of kind of expecting everything instantly, the reward, it's like eating really unnourishing food or something. I mean,
and there are really young brands that show that works, like young hip brands, like I always bring them up on these panels, but like Palace and Supreme are the ultimate example of that, like absolutely massive brands with a huge, very young audience who actually operate in a really conservative way. It's like they announce a product, you get an email if you're subscribed to a newsletter that says this will be dropping in this store at this time, or you'll be able to get this online at this time, and then people literally make a pilgrimage, queue up outside the store and buy. It's so
there's a collective called, I'm sure you guys know, The Basement. In London as well. It's a similar thing where you almost have to and you have to be a member for about sort of 6 months. So you can't be like a fast friend. You have to actually engage with it, and you have to show a bit of commitment. And actually there's a big reward in that, because you get something that other people don't have. You get to be kind of part of a proper tribe. Because the funny thing is, we were doing a bit of research on this recently, looking at Gen Z and looking at the difference between Gen Z and millennials, because everyone bangs on about millennials at every conference you go to. And saying that actually Gen Z are more cynical because they've grown up in a really difficult time. So it's not so much about
I think they're bored of being bashed as well. You know, it's always like millennials have killed this.
Millennials, it's all about being entitled to things and optimistic. And that entitlement, you're right, part of that comes from kind of being able to have access to things just like that. So it's like the dating thing. I work in an office where people just go through dating nightmares constantly because of the whole ghosting thing, and literally, you know, relationships, you know, flourish and then die, literally wither and die instantly. So consequently, you know, below them, there's also this desire for stability. And actually, so it makes, funnily enough, there's a sort of desire to be subversive, but also to get a stability. Part of that stability is having a kind of tribe of people and being a part of a collective, and you know, and also, you know, we're also aware now that people are rampantly consuming things. So that's where you get that backlash against. You know, I think people are a lot more aware about not buying.
It's really
things
interesting, actually. Rosanna and I did a panel at the V&A where we talked a lot about see now, buy now.
Debate there.
And it was fascinating because we were kind of quite. I'd say relatively unopinionated about it, more presenting the facts, and there was real kind of upset from some people in the audience about what this meant for consuming, and they were like, why are none of you worried about what this means? Like, people are buying more and more and more. And I thought that was fascinating, because it is that thing of, it's a problem across fashion, it's like there are just too many clothes everywhere, and I wonder if that is something that fashion needs to take more seriously.
I don't think, I think, with See Now, Buy Now, people automatically assume that you have to consume more with it, which I don't think has to be the case. I think if you've got September and you've got February, if we literally just kept it to those two things, that's actually not that bad. The problem is having all these resorts and pre-fall. And when Topshop started even getting emails, and you're like, what the hell? This is like insane. Just it's a bit like saying it's Valentine's Day, buy something, it's Mother's Day, it's like sort of retail festival. I spoke to
even luxury retailers, I get an email every day, new in, you're like, what? Like,
so you could still have feasibly a model where it was like buy now, see now, but you do it once a year. So actually, I think it would be good to stop totally demonising see now, buy now as being the worst in the world. It's not necessarily. And also, if we, I'm really interested to see what Burberry do with this in terms of their communications around it. Like, if you're going to buy something immediately, what else can you see about the product? What can you see about the inspiration of the product? Can you then, after the show, be taken through a video where you see, a whole load of inspiration about Virginia Woolf and Orlando, and is it actually an opportunity to give us more context and more enriching things?
I hope, and I'm sure there will be, because do you remember, 5 years ago, in kind of brand marketing, adding the word buy to your marketing, particularly your social media, was a bit of a dirty word, and it was always like discover or read, explore. So that's a real shift as well, because social media has just been, if one was supposed to be doing it well, you were storytelling. So how much are they going to put the commerciality at the very fore of their social media? I think that would be fascinating to see. I do remember that panel. It was quite terrifying, because Lou and I were in a really well-lit stage, and then the audience was completely dark, and we just had members of the audience. I think the thing they were questioning is the production cycle and the ethical values of that production cycle, that was probably poorly communicated, partly by me, because what everybody needs to bear in mind is Burberry's production cycle hasn't actually changed.
It hasn't changed at
Neither
all,
has ours. We're just revealing it to the consumers and the press at the same time. Well, in our case, the press a few days before. And I think the really interesting change will be VIP dressing, perhaps. Ralph Lauren with their New York fashion show. There was a really good conclusion to the Vogue runway review, where they said that Rosie Huntington-Whiteley was able to kind of see the show, and then she was able to see it in the store because they had it on Madison Avenue that very same evening. But the change now is that the shoppers will go in the following morning and see that collection, and now everybody is on a level playing field. It's the leveling of the playing field, and obviously VIPs and red carpet culture, that's all based around wearing things before it's available online, before consumers have access. So
maybe it'll
be the rise of
maybe
bespoke.
That will have a good benefit of couture and bespoke, where we'll see designers being able to do more, and the red carpet will become less of a selling exercise. That's quite interesting.
But there is though a little bit of an issue in terms of production, surely, in terms of if you're Burberry, they must have to create a certain amount of stuff to be ready, like literally to be pumped, to be tonight, that will be being trucked out to stores, and then they have to sell it, and then so there is a bit of an issue with that.
I think it's that you have to be really. This is where data comes in, because you have to be so savvy when you're doing your buy. So when I used to place 2 years ago, when I was placing the buy for our online boutique, I'd have the data from Net-a-Porter, from all of our wholesale accounts, from the response to the show, from the journalists, and now I don't have that, and I have our customers and what they like and the results from the last season, and from I think it's where customer service and constantly analysing the feedback every week. We do that every Monday. It's so important.
So that's where it gets that is where it gets a little bit tricky in terms of working on past experience rather than putting something out there, and then so that is a little bit.
You can't. It's not. And Burberry will have they are able to show press and wholesale accounts 3 months before, but I imagine production-wise,
market research as well. Like, it was interesting. Like, I don't know if you guys have been watching the Vogue documentary, but like, even that, they do market research for every cover image.
You have to be so careful with market research, because there's generally people don't do what they say they'll do in market research. And also, it's the classic Apple thing. I'm sure everyone's heard that. It's like, well, if we asked people what they wanted to invent, the iPhone would have never been invented, because we don't know. So it's as you were saying, sometimes it's about kind of putting the shot out there in the dark. So, but then we were talking about this the other day. It's the reason I think it's caused such a panic is the idea that you have to sell absolutely everything from your collection immediately, and that's not necessarily the case. It could be, as we're seeing with some other brands, that it's just selling chunks of it or small parts of it, and so actually you have this sort of staggered system where you put some stuff out there, and then the rest of it you kind of hold back and play a longer game with. So
Anya Heinmarch said on the BFC, I was on a round table, the BFC are being fantastic at the moment, they're regularly getting in every month the designers to talk about this change, because it affects everyone in London. And they had one last month with all the brands and designers who had changed their business models. So Christopher Bailey was there, and Anya Heinmarch was there, Giles Deacon, who's now couture only. Anya Heinmarch is approaching the show now in a really interesting way, in that she says that it is for content creation and for content marketing to last you the rest of the following 6 months. And the 6 months should then be approached with regular drops, which is so important for the online consumer. So maybe not releasing everything at once, but it needs to be approached as I suppose it all comes back to the thing of content and storytelling.
I can't think of who the brand it was, but it was was it Hilfiger last season that actually created things that would literally come out kind of week by week. If you were a subscriber, you'd get a bit more of the content from the show. I'm not sure the content was super interesting, but the idea was pretty good.
It's so scary that in terms of fashion, I'm really maybe I'm oppressively nostalgic, but like when we talk about things like content, and I know it's weird, isn't it? It's just like,
well, it's odd that brands creating content. I mean, that certainly didn't exist 10 years ago in a lot of, everywhere.
I'm conscious that the show is going to start in a minute, but I want to go to you, Amy, because as you said, the show is inspired by Orlando. I'm sure all of our very intelligent readers have read Orlando, but can you give us a crash course in Orlando?
Orlando was written by Virginia Woolf in 1928, which is the same year that Radcliffe Hall wrote The Well of Loneliness, and they were both completely scandalous novels in terms of sexuality. But Orlando was really interesting because it wasn't just about, a lesbian relationship between Vita Sackville-West and Virginia Woolf. Virginia Woolf explored biography and how we interpret people's lives, and very much emphasised that we shouldn't just see people in terms of binary or periods, and that actually in all of us there's all sorts of things.
Which is very current to what's being discussed.
Absolutely, and I think what really interests me is, having read the press release about this, and it talks about Orlando and about Nancy Lancaster, And I think the words really appeal to me, and it's the period I love and the literature I love. But what I want to know is...
Because you're curating it, am I allowed to say that?
Yeah, about an exhibition about Gluck at Brighton Museum.
Yes.
So yeah, it's everything I'm interested in, but what I'm really interested in to see about the show is, does the show reflect the narrative of the press release?
Yeah, because we were saying, Burberry really is quite often about girly girls and quite dashing men.
Yes.
It's not really,
even
it's
the
not
campaigns, it's like a girl looking very fragile and like a strapping man.
And it's about the heterosexual relationship, and it's a kind
of... It's incredibly heteronormative as a brand.
It is, and it's very, it's prim, pretty lace in at the waist.
Yeah.
And it's so not about Orlando that changes identity and changes cultures and time, and so I'm really interested to know. And also they've reinforced the whole thing about Nancy Lancaster that started up Colfax and Fowler and said that whole thing about elephant breath, and so they're really reinforcing.
You're kicking up lots of reading from
English interiors. But and the whole thing, I mean, this was so advanced in terms of gender fluidity, or recognising that in all of us.
Yeah, and much, as you said, much more complex to the Well of Loneliness in some ways, which was much more simplistic in terms of how people approach. Well, it was very much about a lesbian relationship.
Yeah, and it was still radical. But this, looking back on this, is extraordinary. But also, it's got so many dress references in, and I want to see if there's a 16th century nobleman and someone in Turkish breeches.
You're probably going to get someone in like a
lace dress,
luxury tracksuit and a lace dress now,
or luxury breeches.
Yes, maybe.
Yeah.
Does it look like it's starting? No, I keep getting freaked out by the constant changes. I do think it's interesting what you were saying, Rosanna, there about the fact it is at Maker's House, and these little bits of content that they've done before. It's very much, it is fascinating, this idea, as you said, like everyone is pushing heritage at the same time as trying to be so sort of forward thinking. We were talking about it on a panel this morning. It was fascinating. Like, it's really interesting that Burberry have been incredibly slow and basically completely actually sort of uninvolved with anything to do with wearable tech, when there's so much conversation about technology with what they do, but then actually when it comes down to it, the product is quite old school luxury, leathers and cashmeres, and I find that quite fascinating, why they're not also using this as an opportunity to be more progressive in their product offer. I wonder if it's something their clients are interested in.
I think the way really the what they're pushing, it's not progressive doing it, I suppose. Again, wait, I'm just contradicting myself. They're really pushing personalisation, which whether it's in VIP dressing or for customers, everybody loves having their initials and their name on things. I think they do, and they have always said, Christopher in particular, it's never tech for tech's sake, which the press releases it sounds like it might be, but I think therefore wearable technology wouldn't go with their brand values and with that statement. And I'm still, you might have done, because you're always kind of 8 months ahead of me in what you've seen, but I'm yet to see wearable tech that I would like to wear.
Yeah, and at the moment the best wearable tech is really related to fitness or beauty, or so it's not necessarily a natural fit. That's really why we're not, when we see it, we tend to see it in department stores, and it's in a kind of special section as a kind of real add-on. So I'm not entirely surprised they haven't done it yet.
You're looking to the future, and I think I've only got my head in the past. But in the mid-19th century, Burberry were incredibly innovative. I mean, they replaced them with these great big heavy waxed raincoats that were really difficult to walk in, and they started easing them up using just sort of linen that was tightly woven.
Well, you see, this is interesting,
wonderful sportswear for women that was really...
you see that, and that's a place where wearable tech might come in more for them, because it's a little bit like a brand like Hunter, is that when people talk about the maker spaces, they're automatically thinking of the kind of Vuitton thing of having like a wizened man, and he's like got his tools, basically like a Santa's elf doing something. And of course, the more we're I don't know why I should be acting this out. I'm really aware this won't look good on screen. But that idea that actually the more that this kind of thing develops, and actually we're looking at whether it's like Levi's working with Project Jacquard with Google, that actually a lot of these maker spaces will become that kind of sci-fi fantasy with artisanal craft. They actually won't be so divorced. There's actually a lot of really exciting work going on in materials developments, and whether it's like you say, whether it's a Hunter and they develop like the pioneers in developing rubber, which sounds kind of really pedestrian now, but actually those things make a big difference. Now we'll probably see these workshops rather than people Santa's elves workshops. We'll see these people kind of working with wild tech and laser cutting and bonding and and embedding the Internet of Things into the fabric of the clothing, and fabric of clothing that will maybe be able to tell us where that thing was bought, or if it's being reproduced somewhere else, or those sorts of things. So I think the concept of what is artisanal and what a craftsman is, that will start to change. And actually, so when we think of sort of heritage and craftsmanship as something that's automatically very rooted in history, actually that will become quite a futuristic thing as well.
Yeah, but that was their history in a way, was that
pioneering about history.
Absolutely, but it wasn't about necessarily artisanal craftsmanship that we associate with couture houses. It really was about making functional clothes using the best possible materials.
And innovative fabric.
And also very progressive in terms of women. Those clothing, you look at magazines and papers from, the 1880s, 1890s, the clothes that the women were wearing were really radical, and, lots of them were labelled Burberry. They were for progressive women. And I just would think that's what you would really promote.
And that's what would make sense with their brand values, exactly. Yeah, of course.
It's freaking me out that the show hasn't started, even though it's
I wonder who is stuck in traffic.
Maybe there's been
what's
a riot
going on
by people that
outside
don't
this
want
studio?
see now, buy now stuff to
it's running late.
A protest.
Or maybe there's a protest from the same people that you're talking.
One of my favourite Burberry moments is when Naomi Campbell was meant to be front row, and obviously Naomi is consistently late to absolutely everything she goes to, and they obviously started the show because I guess they prioritised the huge online audience, so she kind of arrived halfway through and just sort of plonked herself down, which is quite amazing. But that's another thing, is thinking about the shows, as you say, is things that aren't actually for the people who are there really. They're for this huge online audience. They're they're an advertising campaign basically. And I wonder, going back to what you're saying about exclusivity, I wonder if we'll see a kind of backlash against that. And I think you are seeing that a bit with kind of these particularly actually with some of the sort of newer labels, these very small presentations that are quite hard to get a ticket to, and they're not streamed. And Hood by Air did a menswear one in Paris quite recently, where they even put a sticker on the camera of your phone when you went in, so you couldn't take pictures. And it was interesting, and I wonder if that will be something that. Yeah, and I think for the industry, obviously. There is a kind of separation between what you're doing for consumers and what you're doing for industry. So actually, it's almost like in the way that the shows used to be, where it would be quite an elite group of people. That'll happen. There'll be two separate shows in a way.
I think something that we should also bear in mind is the place, the role of the buyer and the role of the journalist, and they're obviously still as relevant as ever. And I do think that there are certain brands that are best seen after a period of the consumer needs to digest and that digest what they see, and that's best done having seen it through the eyes of an editor or through the edit that a buyer chooses for their shop floor. And we were talking earlier about really trend-led brands that break barriers, and that I think it makes the journalist role all the more relevant there in that traditional way. Obviously, the journalist is still hugely relevant to a brand that's buy now, wear now, but in a different way.
Can I throw us somewhere else completely?
Yes.
Which is that I discovered this amazing painting from 1600, and it's by an artist called Isaac Oliver, and it's a fantasy picture of Queen Elizabeth, and it's called The Rainbow, and it is linked to what you're saying, because it's this fantasy dress, and she's wearing this robe, and on the robe is completely surreal eyes and ears. And I was thinking that, when we're talking about perception and it was to suggest that she could hear everything and see everything. And there's it's sort of not unlike the parallels of what we want to do today, and it's the most extraordinary portrait.
Please, can you show me after the panel?
Yeah, it's Isaac Oliver, it's 1600, and it's called, The Rainbow, Queen Elizabeth I, like a fantasy portrait. Completely bizarre. From 1600 with ears and eyes, so it's not a real garment.
So up close, you see the ears and eyes, and then from afar, you don't.
No, you do see them. It's absolutely extraordinary. So she's got a big robe on, and then this sort of cloak, and it's got ears and eyes all over, which is like the technology of.
But it's interesting stuff like that, because I just think there's a lot of kind of Instagrammable moments, and all of we're seeing a lot of sets that play with that kind of thing. But then I worry that. I don't know, designers, I feel like there's such pressure to make things instantly exciting to people that those kind of more, you talk about that garment and the kind of layered meanings within it. And I just don't think that's something that happens so much with fashion anymore. Designers are much less willing to do something that has subtleties or...
Well, to read this press release...
Well, I know.
Well, the funny thing is...
They're always written
like... It promises much.
The funny thing is that maybe the whole see now, buy now thing will throw up more enriching sort of information in that respect, because actually maybe, I mean, okay, a lot of people might just see it and buy it instantly, but then there'll be, if this is a consumer thing, there'll be a lot of consumers that won't be able to. So you've got to imagine there'll be instances of people taking away that show and wanting to click on something and get all this additional information, this additional context, and that's when, you know, an amazing journalist or a curator or all these other people you could bring into the mix to help explain the context behind it.
But also, if you're not, you know, if you're the sort of person, which a lot of us are, which is, you know, you can't buy lots and lots of really expensive clothes, so the pieces you buy you do really consider. I think, I mean, don't you want to be able to read those, read a little bit more
and
into it?
I think that information is probably even more important to a lot of people than literally knowing the factory it was created in, realistically. I know there was a big thing at the beginning where everyone was like, oh, it's all about, you know, which artisan created it, but actually I think it's the wider context.
It isn't, it is about identity and how you present yourself, and I think recently I thought I can't buy that many things, but actually my criteria will be that I will buy things that have got a historical reference, and so I saw Aganovich, quite beautiful sort of clothes, a bit Charles Jamesy, and I thought that's actually my criteria now, that I will buy as a curator, which I suppose I like the historical things anyway, but that's my way of siphoning out.
Exactly, so you might even go onto something and be thinking about buying it, and then, you know, you might have the designer's inspiration, but then maybe there'll be other topics to talk about. So maybe actually with something like this, you'd have Christopher Bailey's kind of mood board, etc., etc. But then maybe there'd also be others saying, you know, here are some of the best articles ever written about sort of dissecting and analysing Orlando, for instance. So actually, but I think, you know, people are, you know, you can only bring so much of yourself to, you know, from a brand perspective, it's about them kind of giving you prompts and steers and kind of triggers to educate
but something that you can, but something that resonates with you and touches you in some way that makes you want to buy it over and above having, like, you know, one more garment.
It's going to make the wrong way.
I'm conscious that the show started, hasn't it, but the stream's not working.
It won't work on their website.
Oh, how strange.
It won't work on where?
I think their stream isn't functioning. We're just getting holding.
We're only setting it on mobile.
Oh.
But with the images they're using, I was interested, plaster casts. So they're using plaster casts from the Walker Art Gallery.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and so it's not even making any attempt to look like the real thing and aligning art and industry in a way that other designers did in the past. It's very much about the reproduction.
Yeah.
And I was saying to you earlier that it's also, you know, they've very cleverly referenced the Walker Art Gallery as opposed to any other, because the Walker are doing all this project with Pride and Prejudice and telling stories about LGBT lives. Yeah. And I don't know how many people who are going to read the press release and make all those links. But the thing is that those connections are there, and I mean they're my connections because it's the museum world, but someone's done their research well. Yeah. Because
traditionally, a consumer never would have even thought about a press release, and they would have only picked up on the tidbits that a journalist had chosen and remained in her. They stayed in her mind 6 months later.
Yeah.
So I think it makes the runway review more relevant and have a wider audience than ever. The critics are very, very relevant and much more than I think you. I remember you said on. I heard you on another panel saying a lot of critics are playing themselves down and almost doing themselves out of a job by saying, "Oh, you know, it's not really. It's quite redundant what we do now." But actually, how exciting! I think it makes what they're writing really relevant, and they'll be a fascinated audience.
Yeah, because we are, you know, people are very disparaging about consumers, almost as if saying, you know, doing something direct for a consumer, as if the consumer is this like big dirty mob that shouldn't be, you know. And actually, there's an opportunity to do something really exciting and you know, put something. I mean, you know, a lot of fashion will probably be frightened because fashion can be quite a rarefied world. So there are a lot of people, I think, won't want that sort of bubble burst, that won't like the idea that it's important to take that out to a wider audience. So it could be a good thing.
We've got a stream now. Where did you find this? Facebook. Did you not get it on their website? Is it just not working?
Every time you click through, it just says access denied.
Oh, that's not good, is it?
On mobile, I find.
Oh. Well, we've got half the show at least. We can have a look at the looks after. Sorry to cut you off there.
The gender fluidity, obviously, if we're taking it on a really superficial value, gender fluidity in the book, and this is a men's and women's show at once. So easy way to understand it, easy reference.
But I always think it's worse when they show them together because it's exactly what you're saying. He looks like a kind of...
makes the difference more pronounced.
Exactly.
I mean, there is...
Oh, I see what you mean, the nipped in waist.
If we're doing comparative, there is no...
Yeah.
There's nothing...
I mean, she looks a little
fluid
bit
about
like
those.
she
could be in her boyfriend's coat.
Yeah.
Oh, it freaks me out when this new fashion for doing slow-mo and live streams.
That's our history of it really not working back when it started. We're live? No, we're not. Not anymore.
I know, exactly. So just...
I'm always really put off because I feel like I can't get past the trench coats.
Just some facts about the show. There were, in the reception when people came in, there were people stitching and embroidering fabric and sat sewing. So it's this idea of make again. And it's interesting with the music, again, it's hand-done music. It's live violinists and celloists. It's not the usual
We had
kind
some
of young pop
1890s, 1890s big sleeves.
I really want us to bear in mind the seasonless nature of this now. This is a September show. It's for the global audience, so it needs to appeal as much to somebody in the southern hemisphere as the northern, and I know it's something that everyone's going to be struggling with so much. The BFC have said that they will no longer be referring to Autumn Winter 16 and SS17. From this season onwards, they're referring to the September collections, which is a really big step for them to make, a really big move. So I'm just looking at this thinking, is this shoppable now in both hemispheres? Is this as relevant? You know, Burberry are about to have 2 Autumn Winter 16 collections on the shop floor, that which was shown in February and this one now. So are they both relevant?
It's funny, isn't it? I'm finding it quite hard to say a whole lot about it because I kind of feel like I'm looking at pieces.
The live stream's also incredibly confusing because
you can't see it by looks.
Yeah. It's not, I am looking for some meaningful gender mixing and not getting too much of it.
And also that it was supposed to be, it's not only about the gender but also roving through periods.
Exactly.
And Orlando roves through periods but also through places, so you've got the Turkish trousers and the...
it has the opportunity to be a really exciting inspiration and reference.
Yeah, I think so. And it really is rooted in our cultural identity and it's contemporary in terms of, you know, notions of gender and sexuality and identity. But then also, how do you express that in a garment? It's a big ask as well.
And in a commercial garment.
Absolutely.
You want to be able to sell straight away. I mean, even the rough collars, a lot of a lot of gentlemen would find them challenging.
But then when you've got a Crombie coat and an Elizabethan ruff, I guess it is going some way to attempting to...
Yeah, and then maybe would the woman wear...
That's a real compliment, it's going some way to attempt.
Yeah, I was very effusive about
that.
Yeah,
but how few people will wear them. But what would be interesting is if you start getting women buying the men's clothes.
Yeah. Which happens actually a lot. So I was speaking to Phoebe English, obviously totally different kind of designer about this. And I was complimenting her menswear and she said, oh, but it's so simple. But she said it's great because it's allowed me to really push the women's wear forward. And she said that she also found that a lot of women were buying the menswear almost for the basics and then looking to the women. So I think that does happen. I think it definitely happens.
It's happening more.
I think it's always happened, but actually it's weirdly always happened on a high street level, probably more than on a high fashion level. I think every woman in their wardrobe probably has a men's jumper from Uniqlo, well, not every woman, but a lot of women has a big cozy man's jumper, maybe a man's t-shirt. But I think if you're spending that much money on high fashion, it's this idea that do you want to buy something that in some ways is wrong? You know, there's always that thing, it's like, you know, when you should buy something the wrong size, and even if it fits you, you're like, but it's not my size. I think there is that thing of spending a lot of money.
But is it also that thing about what is right for you, irrespective of how you are?
Yeah.
And you are multiple things, and you can wear those clothes.
But that's why the labelling of clothing. We were talking about it before we went live. Like, you know, it tends to be a shop floor for the women's and a shop floor for the men's, and immediately that doesn't encourage you to sort of look around or explore. It's like this is where you're meant to go.
Because Selfridges, their new designer studio, is mixing it up, isn't it?
But it is very rare, you know, women's changing rooms, men's changing rooms, and even the assistants sometimes, if you ask for something, they
and the fit, and
I quite like,
quite Gucci-esque, this show, and it's matching.
Do you know what I mean? The funny thing is, going back to what we were talking about, it is, it really is. Going back to what we were talking about, the kind of content thing and the contextualising all this, I would actually genuinely love to see this and have it kind of annotated, a bit like, you know, when you rewatch a film and you have the director's commentary over the top, and literally, and have somebody saying, okay, and this is from this period and this period and this period. I would
but that's how they used to do fashion shows. You know, someone would read out the look as she came out. That would be amazing. Like, actually, to bring that back would be quite incredible. But I'd love them
to literally say, you know, this is from 1870, this particular ruff, and it was based on this, and there's something I'd find really...
but I guess that's something that they're saving for their social media, you know.
Yeah, probably. And there are looks in this that interest me more than some of their other shows. Because I was watching a couple of Christopher Bailey's interviews last night, and the one that really irritated me, that I felt was really disingenuous, is when he was talking about the rucksacks on the back. It was obviously, clearly, they created this sort of commuter backpack collection, and they've been told you've got to shove, you know, at least sort of 10 of these down the runway. And he sort of said, oh, it's because I was trying to you know, make it a bit more rough and ready. And it was like, no, that's not true. That's just not true, because it was basically a slip dress, whack 'em on, literally probably like someone throwing it at the back. Whereas this interests me a bit more. At least I feel like, I don't know, maybe it's just the level of research.
It's weird because it actually feels less product-y than a lot of their other shows, which is kind of ironic given that they're trying to sell stuff straight away. But there's not, like, as you said, that show, you were like backpack. And you don't quite feel like that with this show.
I think this show's more bohemian than...
It's definitely, you're definitely more bohemian.
It's more bohemian.
Well, they've often
selected historical references. British style, definitely.
It's got,
But they have often picked these very bohemian inspirations in the past, and then the clothes have really not lived up to it. And these do slightly more. Like, they do actually look vaguely bohemian.
But interesting. I mean, I think they've got... You can read quite a lot into them.
And they're also not actually particularly commercial clothes. Like, at the last men's show, there was, like, you know, tracksuit tops and a lot of quite, you know, easily sellable garments. And at this, I think it's probably quite a lot in the styling, but...
Yeah, I do too. But I went into the Regent Street shop this morning before doing this. And
doing a refetch.
But the clothes were completely unlike anything like this.
Yeah.
I mean, it was little lace dresses and they go in and out and a short, and
that's another thing. Is how
these are more fluid and layered, and the materiality is actually more interesting as well.
I think, Em, you're very right about the Gucci thing. I think it's that, you know, when we were quite shocked when we first saw the Gucci one, I think I might have been on the panel, and it was that kind of nerdish foppishness that we were a bit like, whoa, compared to, like, you know, obviously, particularly the Tom Ford era. And there's something in that where actually, you know, there's sort of, some of this, there's still a kind of girliness to an extent, but actually the bodies are really quite covered up.
Yeah, it's very prim. I think it's like that, Valentino, I guess, they brought back that prim thing, and it's just evolved now into this kind of eccentric rather than sort of princessy
Which character. I guess is that kind of idea of fashion, sort of saying, well, either, you know, if you're not going to be the kind of hyper-sexually charged, it's because you're deliberately, it's not the same, like you say, it's not the same as androgyny, but it's about this kind of non-binary fluidity that it's a slightly different thing to androgyny.
Rather than it being about merging genders, it's about merging ages. It's this idea of looking like a little old lady, or boys looking like grannies and what have you. I think it also reminds me of Gucci because of the green carpet, and Gucci always had green, like quite fabulous carpets. Can we have we got pictures of the looks in yet? I'm conscious we missed a bit of the live stream.
Well, the styling is very autumnal and layered, and but then I suppose each individual piece and each individual item could be, it's not necessarily wintry.
No. They've styled it cleverly, definitely.
Yeah, so you've got shorts with a raincoat.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the styling...
But it does feel. It doesn't feel like a spring-summer collection.
No,
that's
not at all.
Sure.
Oh no, absolutely. I just meant because they're seeing the September collection as seasonless.
Yeah.
But I think that it is styled in a way that would appeal most to people in the Western, in the Northern Hemisphere facing a cold.
Are we surprised by this as a collection? Is that what we were expecting for a collection that has so much scrutiny on it because of these business reasons that we discussed?
The thing that surprises me is that they didn't shove out a lot of really obvious accessories, or, you know, whether that's bags or shoes or something like that. And so I kind of feel like I'd like to give them a clap for that.
Yeah.
Sales will probably plummet on a totally.
But then you also have to think maybe this see now buy now thing is an exercise of getting people onto the website. Who cares what they buy? You know, if they don't buy that season, but they buy some trenches and a scarf. You know, maybe that's part of the...
Yeah, because it's like trenches and ponchos and bags that they sell most of, I think.
Can we have a look at the pictures, Ben? Oh, okay, cool. We'll wait.
I think if Burberry had a real problem with that sort of check and what that came to represent, a show like this actually does quite a lot to overcome it.
That's very true.
That's true, actually.
Very true.
So maybe it goes back to what we're saying about the makers and trying to emphasise much more of a kind of less of a commercial thing.
Well, there's a certain audience which are definitely not going to assimilate that in the way that the check was. You know, there is no way you can kind of transport that into a cap, or do you know what I mean? Something that's inexpensive to buy.
Yeah.
Water.
And I think I keep going back to seasonality. I'm a woman obsessed, but I think it's because it's something we talk about a lot at Matthew Williamson, because I like to think we're a bit of a year-round summer brand. I pretend it's summer all year long and maybe just add a fur coat and then I'm fine. Never wear tights. And so that's why I'm really struck with this, and I think that will be the most obvious thing when picture editors are looking at their, you know, if we're talking about the newspapers rather than the fashion press, and they're looking at their London Fashion Week image maybe for the cover tomorrow, there will be a clear point of difference, because even if this is a seasonless collection, the style is very autumn-winter, the styling, I should say. And so how different is this to the brights that we saw at Peter Pilotto and Temple yesterday? And I think if nothing else, just the palette. I think, if you're looking at this from we should look at it from a non-industry perspective. This is very much geared towards the consumer. So on a superficial value, you can certainly see the difference there, which I think is an important difference.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Of course, now he's. I mean, I know he's president and creative director, but ultimately having, relinquished being CEO, it's interesting to maybe this is a kind of announcement of saying, taking full-on creativity back a little bit.
Yeah, that's interesting. Are we having technical troubles? Well, maybe we've seen enough.
Maybe it's a sign.
Maybe it's a sign.
Oh, look, here we go. There are a few more. What do you think about I'm interested to ask you, what do you think about the gender fluidity here? Do you think that there are pieces that can be, do you think the coats and the jackets could be borrowed from man to woman? And Lou, you always wear menswear.
I just don't think, it's not the story, is it? I mean, it is the story, it's the given story, because they want journalists to write about that. But I don't get the sense it's informed the design of that collection.
No, neither do I, but I think it's, in terms of timeliness, it was a very astute move.
Yeah. It's so funny, we were talking about this literally this morning on the Christopher Kane panel.
Yeah, to align it with this, but there are certain historical references. You know, there's Elizabethan ruffs, there's 1890s big sleeves. Does it romp through history? No, does it?
It's quite literal as well, isn't it? Actually, when you look at it like this and you see some of the kind of fencing shirts, and you almost feel a bit like you're literally looking at something ripped straight out of a period drama. It's not, like when we talk about Westwood and you look at the sort of reinterpretation of these eras, this feels quite literal to me.
It's very much in the styling. I think that's the thing, it's such a styled collection, but maybe that goes back to what we're saying, the pressure that is on this runway show now is it needs to function as a campaign. So it's like, even they've got this combined pressure of selling product but also creating this aesthetic wow moment like you would with a campaign. So there's a lot of different things to solve, aren't there? I'm not as impressed as I wanted to be, but I'm intrigued. How's the rest of you feeling?
Yeah, I'm kind of wavering in the middle at the moment. I'm not as disappointed.
Are you going to be running to your laptop to buy?
I think so. I mean, I'm not as disappointed as I have been, but that's because if I saw the interview afterwards, I probably would have been. Because that literally makes me want to punch the screen generally. Clearly, I've never worked at Burberry. But I much prefer it to last season, for instance. At least I feel there's a sort of, a hook that's at least been investigated, and I find that more satisfying.
I think the clothes are more interesting. I think, if I'd gone when the things that I saw in the shop, I just have no relationship whatsoever, but I don't know, I think these are more interesting in terms of materiality, and there's a range of silhouettes and the layering
and to be fair, if we could see some of these up close, there might be, in terms of the historic references, there might be some really amazing work in there that we would appreciate more if we could see these.
And maybe
like looking at that dress, for instance, that
in
might be
look
incredible.
3, can you see that? It's this kind of glowing bodice in look 3. Maybe that is wearable tech right there on the chest.
Well, I wondered if it was the
giant
lights.
lap. It's like a giant iPad.
It's like 2 eyes.
And it's probably streaming the show.
There we go. So we've discovered wearable tech.
It's Queen Elizabeth's eyes from 1600.
Look at you with
It's
your
from the
references.
portrait.
I think you need
And
to
her ears picking
set
up what
a
we're saying
bibliography
right now.
for this panel so everyone can go and
Beaming our words right back to Christopher
know.
Bailey this minute.
Let's tweet a bibliography from you after.
Yeah,
the
we
panel,
should
please,
do.
can we? I think that would be really good.
Well, I feel like I have lots to go and read, but shall we round off the discussion with giving Christopher Bailey a clap for giving us lots to talk about, and congratulations on his show.
Absolutely.